Researchers from Wayne State University in Detroit head out to the Detroit River aboard a boat provided by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. On the shoreline, heavy industry and a coal-burning electric plant. The crew's work starts near Detroit's Belle Isle State Park. Water researcher Bridget Baker has been leading these expeditions these past 2 years.
At this spot, we're really in close proximity to the water intake for the Great Lakes Water Authority, which is one of the main drinking water treatment plants for the Detroit metro area. So we like to get an idea of what's taken into the water treatment plant.
They're gathering water samples to find out what chemicals have found their way into the river that provides drinking water to communities from Lake St. Clair to Lake Erie. 50 years ago, this waterway was one of the most polluted in the country. Industrial chemicals like PCBs, dioxins, and heavy metals that lurk mostly in the river bottom. There's been a lot of research into that, and the river is much improved. But now the study has turned to a different breed of contaminants.
We're really more interested in what are called emerging contaminants, or contaminants that aren't largely regulated or thought of as contaminants. So for that reason, we don't really expect them to be in the sediment or at the lower levels.
Another scientist named Baker, Dr. Tracy Baker, with Wayne State's Institute of Environmental Health Services, leads the program.
There are a number of contaminants that most of us know about that are industrial and agricultural that have been in the environment for a while. But there's this new group of contaminants that we're looking at. We know are in the environment, but they haven't been studied a lot, and so we're not exactly sure what the health effects might be.
PFAS and other emerging contaminants pose health risks that aren't well understood, and this team is working to change that. Step one is figuring out what chemicals are actually in the environment.
So these 4 little bottles here will test for about 100 different chemicals.
Some of these emerging contaminants are part of our lives.
I'm ready for you whenever.
They're called PPCPs, standing for pharmaceuticals and personal care products. And that category includes prescription drugs, cosmetics, sunscreen, cleaning solutions, and things we eat and drink.
So we have found a lot of nicotine and cotinine, which is a byproduct of nicotine in the water.
I was surprised by the amount of caffeine that's in the environment. Nicotine or breakdown products of nicotine, the antibiotics, I thought we might see some, but we're seeing quite a few of them. Also, some of the contrast agents that come from hospitals, we're seeing those in the river as well.
Contrast agents used for CT scans or MRIs, they pass right through a patient's body, and they have to end up somewhere. And here the researchers have found other things like cocaine.
A lot of the chemicals that we're interested in looking at are endocrine disrupting chemicals, so even at small amounts, they can act like hormones in our bodies. And PFAS is one of those chemicals.
PFAS, an emerging contaminant one Detroit and Great Lakes Now have told you about before, was used for decades in waterproofing agents, firefighting foam, Teflon pans, and even food containers.
We traditionally sample at a meter depth, but again, because of the PFAS chemicals, the way their chemical structure is, they tend to stay at the surface of the water. So for these, we sample at both the surface and at a meter depth.
PFAS has been linked to health problems including infertility, diabetes, and cancer. Add that to a lot of other chemicals detected in the water. But what, if anything, are these chemicals in the environment doing to us? Back at Wayne State's Integrated Biosciences iBio Center, thousands of zebrafish are helping find out. Zebrafish aren't a Great Lakes species. They're actually native to Asia, but they work well as test animals.
I actually had zebrafish growing up. They were like my favorite fish. And then when I found out they were a model, I figured it was a different fish. I figured it couldn't have been my aquarium Danny-O fish, but it was.
The problems exhibited in zebrafish can translate to problems humans could have. The fish will show behavioral and genetic changes when exposed to chemicals like PFAS. It gets a little complicated. PFAS is actually a whole different family of chemicals.
We have different concentrations of PFAS. This is a mixture of PFOS and PFOA. We have one concentration at the EPA health advisory limit, which is 70 parts per trillion, and then concentrations above and below that.
We can then take the plate, and track their behavior with this high-speed camera.
The very young zebrafish show changes immediately.
Then we can look and see different patterns of behavior and how they respond to those chemicals and what has changed neurologically with those fish. You start to see them swimming a little bit more sporadic.
The fish aren't acting right. They have trouble swimming.
We have seen gene expression changes that are related to cancer pathways as well as fertility and endocrine disrupting pathways in those fish. This is a good example. It is concerning that we are seeing these changes that could easily be linked to these chemicals causing disease, including cancer as well as reproductive disease in humans.
Tracy Baker's research extends to the Detroit drinking water plant, not far from where Bridget Baker's crew takes offshore water samples. Here, a smaller lab with more zebrafish.
So these fish are basically being submersed in Detroit River water, whereas at iBio, we are looking more specifically at individual chemicals that we know are in the Detroit River. And so we're kind of doing more controlled exposures in that environment.
The researchers need consistent light and temperature for the experiments to work properly. Baker found some cutting-edge enclosure technology, a grow tent, well known to those raising indoor plants like, well, marijuana.
Half a liter.
Back on the Detroit River, we're in what's considered the most polluted area in Michigan, down by the wastewater treatment plant. People nearby complain about air quality, but the focus is what's in the water, looking here for evidence of statin drugs, cholesterol fighters that have come into heavy use here and around the world.
One of our hopes is once we have some of this research under our belt here locally is to take it to other cities in the Midwest, but also comparing it with non-urban and non-industrialized places throughout the Great Lakes.
We are kind of living in this contaminant soup. So just paying attention to, your lotions and shampoos, your other products, and seeing if there are ingredients that you can't pronounce or you don't know what they are, and try to change the products where, you do know what all the ingredients are.